Hello and welcome once again to the 13th episode of Voices of Rhodesian Soldiers. What I'm going to talk about in this episode is the amount of wildlife that we encountered while in the military, and I have some funny and happy episodes to talk about. I think I'll start off with elephants, which happen to be my favorite animal. They are the most majestic, beautiful, gregarious, human-like animals you can ever come across. Their family structure, the way they walk, the way they move, the way they protect their young, they're just lovely animals, and certainly are my favorite animal. The thing that struck me most about elephants is that how quietly they could move through the bush. These thundering great big animals with this grey skin, which you think would stand out like a brick. In fact, their camouflage was incredible, and they could move very silently. When they moved their feet forward, there would be hardly a crackle underfoot. There would be hardly the sound of a twig snapping or anything of that nature. And I had several encounters with elephants. I think I'll talk about the first one, which was quite humorous. Towards sunset, or just after sunset one evening, we moved down to the Zambezi riverbank to set up an ambush. And we'd been watching this female elephant, a cow, with its calf in the water, just frolicking around, and it was spectacular. But as it got darker, the female mother, the mother just gently tapped the bum of the baby elephant and escorted him or her out of the water. It was just such a lovely sight, something that you would enjoy with your own family. Anyway, as time went by, it got darker and darker, but there was still enough starlight and whatever, and a crack of moon up above to see around us, and the silver reflection came off the moon, or the moon onto the water, so it did light up the area a little bit. And I heard the odd twig snap to my left, and then I looked over to my left, and there was like parts of the light shining through the trees, which was very dim, was just being blacked out. And then there was another snap of a twig, and then this elephant came out of nowhere. That was about 7 or 8 o'clock at night, possibly 9 o'clock at night. We'd started a guard roster for, well, in fact, it must have been later. It must have been about 10 o'clock at night, because some of the guys were in their sleeping bags. The ambush had ended at that point, and some of the guys were in their sleeping bags. Others of us were sitting quietly on top of our bags in case anything happened. And then out of nowhere, this elephant came crashing out of the bush, shrieking at the top of its lungs, its tusk up, bellowing. I can honestly say it was no more than 20 feet away. And I got a hell of a fright. And the guy next to me, I forget his name now, I think his name was Alan, he tapped his magazine on his rifle to try and scare it off. We weren't willing to shoot such a beautiful animal. But beyond him, there was a guy called Yanni, who was just a small, rather timid sort of Afrikaner guy. And he sat bolt upright. I'll never forget this bushy, white, blonde hair sitting up from his sleeping bag. And he saw this, and I could almost picture his eyes opening like saucers. And bless old Yanni, he just stood straight up. He didn't even try to get out of his sleeping bag. He just ran off in the sleeping bag, like kids do at sack and bean races or whatever you call them at school. It was so funny, out of the corner of my eye, watching this guy scuttle away, screaming at the top of his lungs, with his legs still in the sleeping bag, hopping along. And anyway, we made enough noise and scared the elephant off, and went crashing through the bush. So that was a humorous event. But by that time, we were all awake we'd compromised our position and we had to move off. The other time that we incurred an experience with an elephant was very sad. It was down in the southeast of the country. We were going into Mozambique to commence our patrols, which started just beyond the power lines coming down from Cobora. But between the border and that point, there was some rather thick bush around the very southeast corner, and we were making our way through this thick bush. I was on sort of a small crest of a hill looking at this semi-jungle below me, and I got a radio, and I first of all saw a helicopter down below us and circling around. So I inquired from our major further back, what's going on, why is there Cyclone 7, a chopper in this area? And I got the very sad news that one of our sergeants in another platoon, I'll only give his first name, Rob, had been walking down a tunnel that had been created by larger animals like elephants through this heavy overgrowth, and he was walking along there, and this elephant came charging out and pinned him to the ground and actually put its tusk right through his chest. And the guy shot at the elephant and it ran off. And the sad thing about it was that the elephant had no trunk. It had been blown off by a plowshare mine in the minefield between Rhodesia and Mozambique. There was a very vast minefield, probably 100 meters wide, that ran from Crook's Corner in the southeast of the country, where Mozambique, South Africa, and Rhodesia joined together. Ran from there right all the way past Umtali, right up there. I think it went as far as that, or maybe only as far as Umtali. But anyway, this poor elephant had obviously wandered into the minefield and had its trunk blown off, and it was enraged, and poor old Rob was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. Also near Victoria Falls, there was a massive explosion one day, and a patrol was sent out in the morning to find out what was going on. And it was a slip road off the main road between Bulawayo and Victoria Falls. And some guys went down there and they actually found an elephant that had stood on a landmine. The mines that were laid were TMH-46 or TM-46, I seem to remember. My memory's a bit rough on that. But I think it was about 12 kilos of explosive in it, so it was enough to kill an elephant. It had blown its front quarter mainly off. And in similar fashion, we were once based about 40 kilometers east of Victoria Falls at a place called Jambesi Keep, and I was sitting having breakfast one morning with a couple of other guys in the radio room at this keep, and we heard a loud bang to the north of us, and I went outside up onto the parapet wall on top of the bunker at the corner of this keep, and I could see smoke rising in the distance, a cloud of dust. So we got a couple of truckloads of guys and we went out there to investigate, and it didn't take long for us to find out the cause of the bang. Some cattle had been walking along a path, and I think the cow second from front had stood on a mine and detonated it. And this poor animal got blown clean in half. I mean, from the middle of its back forward was gone, and it was actually neatly arrayed in the trees around us. We had pick and pay built on. The animal behind it was severely wounded, so we shot that, and the one that had been in front had lost a chunk of its rear quarters, so we shot that one as well. It wasn't nice. But, living on rations, tinned meat and all that sort of stuff is not very pleasant. So we cut off some legs from the animals, and along the spine we had a chef on call up with us, and we brought this meat back to him, and his eyes lit up, and he had a selection of sauces in the kitchen there at the where we stayed at the keep. Just behind the radio room was a nice little kitchen, and he said, right, definitely we're going to have some serious grub tonight. Well, anyway, that night 50 gooks decided to attack the keep, and the next morning we picked up 52 tail fins. So they fired 52 mortar shells at us. They fired everything you can imagine. There was just white and not white tracer, green tracer, and red tracer exchanging hands. But unfortunately, one of those rounds, mortar rounds, went through into the kitchen and blew it to smithereens. And there was a big window above where the meat had been prepared, and that was just shattered and impregnated into the meat. So that was the end of that experience. I've just written a few others down here. Eating rations in the bush is tiring, it's boring, unless you take along all sorts of condiments that you can put into it. It can get pretty boring. So whenever we had the opportunity to shoot something where it wasn't, like at the end of a patrol or at the beginning of a patrol before we moved into an area where we couldn't be compromised, we would shoot something. And I remember standing on the edge of the river, Zambezi River, and this guinea fowl or whatever other bird it was came scuttling past me, and I shot it, and this thing took up into the air and flew over the middle of the river, and I thought, how could I miss that? It was 10 feet away. That bullet definitely went through it, and it had no sooner got to the middle of the river than it flopped down dead into the river and floated away for a meal for a crocodile. We also did other food gathering exercises by using our FNs, our rifles. We used to sit on banks and watch schools of fish go by, and we'd put a couple of rounds in there. And for those of you technical, a bullet doesn't travel very far in water, but its initial impact, the shock, is quite intensive when, I believe it's 19 tons per square inch that an FN bullet exerts, hits the water and stuns fish. So we used to pull them out, fillet them, put them in butter in our tins, our cans that we cooked in, and had wonderful fish meals with a bit of salt. Another time I was ending a patrol around Binga somewhere. We were on this sandy cove, and these egrets were flying. We were waiting to be uplifted, so there was no worry about being compromised. But I can almost imagine the Zambians seeing the scene that I'm about to describe. These white sort of egrets were flying high above us in circles, and I playfully raised my rifle up and aimed at one of them, and the guy said to me, "Oh, you'll never hit one of those, sir. Just don't even bother." And I thought, right, well, stuff you, I'm always up to a challenge. And I pulled the trigger, and the thing the bird that I'd aimed at just carried on flying in a circle. And of course I started to get mocked by the guys. But then, just like that guinea fowl, it folded its wings, and it came down in a circle, spiraling down, landed right at my feet, and there was a little bit of blood on its chest, and it had a bullet right dead center of its chest. I mean, I was as stunned as anybody else, but I can imagine some Zambian soldiers or terrorists across the river looking at this saying, crumbs, if that's the type of accuracy we're heading into, I don't want anything to do with it. Another animal that we had fun with was the hippo. The one time we tried to get fish, some big ones, we decided to use a grenade that was looking a little bit suspect. The pin was worn, so I threw a grenade in the river, and about 70 or 80 meters away, these hippos came flying out of the water, almost vertically, And I thought afterwards, oh, you idiots, I've damaged the eardrums of those hippos. But the way they came out the water, literally almost walking on water to get to the bank, was quite funny. But, for animal lovers, which I am myself, now appreciate was not a wise move. But one night we were in ambush, and on the Zambezi River. We were a little bit inland in this little re-entrant, and we'd settled into ambush. It was a hot night. We were all lying on top of our sleeping bags, ready to open fire if anything walked through. And the moon was as bright as anything, a big orange dusty moon up to our left. And the next thing, we just heard this hum, 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 charging noise, and coming from behind us, and a couple of us only just managed to roll over in time to avoid this hippo coming crashing through our patrol and running and jumping into the river with this huge explosion of water as a couple of tons of meat landed in there. So that was a funny experience as well. Buffaloes, we saw a lot of buffaloes in the national parks at Victoria Falls. But the one night we were ambushing a path up on this plain up above the valley, and the grass was only about a foot high there, and we were lying behind this really big log, and we settled down into ambush, and at about 11 o'clock at night we decided to go onto a rota where we would have one guy watching and the others would sleep. Well, it was my turn to watch, and it was a semi-moonlit night, a lot of stars, so you couldn't quite see anything. It was like a grey light, and I heard this rustling off to the left, and it got louder and louder and louder, and then I started to notice the part of the vista to my left was getting sort of blacked over. And I thought, what the hell is this? Is this a massive column of men walking back to the river? So I woke the other guys up. We got our claymores all ready to fire, although we're ready to fire, but, ready to be activated. And then this shuffling noise came closer and closer, and my heart was beating like crazy. And then we could smell them, and I think they smelled us at the same time as well. And this massive herd of buffalo had walked into our ambush position. And they didn't get startled or anything like that, but they sort of backed off a bit. And I'm glad they did. There must have been 200 or 300 of them. And they just silently shuffled past us. It was such a beautiful sight. I love buffalo. In fact, I saw so many animals in the national parks. The monkeys up in the trees, down at the riverfront, these vines that grew down and the monkeys would swing around, and I'd lie there with my back against an ant nest and look up at all these beautiful animals. They were very entertaining. And on one patrol through there, I always led the patrols, I came through this like alley of grass, tall elephant grass either side of me. There was a little rivulet in front of me with a pool of water, and on the other side was a grassy bank, and I paused as I saw movement. I brought my rifle up ready to shoot, thinking it might have been an enemy. But in fact what it was the tail of a big male lion. And then I saw the female's head pop up behind him, and they hadn't seen me or detected us at all. And I just watched them for about 3 or 4 minutes, just cavorting around on the grass. He was putting his paw on her cheek and ear, and she was lolling around with them. But then I don't know if one of the guys behind me moved or the wind changed or what, but they looked over at me, and the next thing they were gone like a shot. A lovely memory. A memory that wasn't so good was with one of my guys in my platoon, or was it one of the other platoons? I can't remember, but a bit of a funny story about this guy. He was renowned for not washing. He was a filthy guy. Apparently when he took his boots off in the barracks, everyone would flee. So one day he decided to go and be an idiot in a river, and he went in, and he no sooner got 20 meters in than he went under. Croc had taken him, and he came up screaming and yelling. All the guys, got their rifles ready to see if they could shoot this thing, and he got dragged down again, and then he came up again and swimming back to the bank, and then he went down a third time, and eventually he got back with 130 bite marks all over his body. And when things had all settled down, and they asked him later, "How did you get away?" And he said, "I remember the stories of sticking your fingers in the croc's eyes. Well, I tried it, and it worked. I just jabbed my fingers in there. I got my knife out my belt, and I was stabbing it in its face. And the croc let him go." But of course, the story that circulated the barracks afterwards is that he was such a dirty, filthy, gungy guy that the croc spat him out. So that was a little bit of humour there. There's the buffalo, what else? Lions, elephants on the river. They were beautiful. Another set of animals that served us in the military was horses. And I've heard that there were over 224 horses killed in the war. The Grey Scouts used horses, and these animals were very brave. They were trained to ignore the sound of rifle fire near their ears. They would charge into battle. They were superb, really, because they could catch up the enemy and trap him very quickly and encircle him. And they were used all over the countryside. Well, there was an attack on Big Falls one night, and the next day I went with my mortar team to give some support to guys searching the area down below us that had been attacked. And I was just sitting there with my mortar crew, leaning up against a couple of cases of mortar rounds, and I heard this rustling over to my left, and I just saw this row of Grey Scouts coming out of the bush, all blacked up, rifles at the ready. They looked a really tough lot, and I just loved looking at the horses. They were beautiful. So I think we lost 224 there. The other animal that I never really saw, I suppose a reptile is an animal. I was amazed at how infrequently I saw snakes. But the one time I was down in Matibitu trust land in the southeast of the country, and I don't know if it was a puff adder. I don't know if you get puff adders down there or what, but I was walking along this pathway, and that particular snake was so well camouflaged I didn't see it. And anyway, I sort of took my mind off things a little bit as I was walking along, just looking at the bush left and right, and then I was just about to step forward when I saw the slightest movement at my foot, and I stopped. Or did I stop? I think I actually stepped over it, if my memory serves correctly. And this thing had a big square triangular head. I don't know if it was a puff adder or what, but it was a nasty looking thing. I certainly wouldn't like to have been bitten by that. There were all sorts of things that went on in the military with animals. We had dog sections. We were going into, I think it was Matibitu Tribal Trust Land in the southeast of the country. We were going in a convoy of 3 or 4 vehicles, and the guy up front just had a sixth sense that he was driving into trouble, and so he put his foot on the brake, got a dog out, and went forward, and he had no sooner gone 6 meters forward than the dog sat down, and as it had been trained, because it could smell explosives under the ground, and an engineer guy came forward and very carefully removed the topsoil, and eventually pulled out a boosted landmine. I think it had another mine under it, but it's over 40 years ago. I do remember it being boosted. It might have had packs of TNT under there. I don't know. Yeah, so it was a time of interaction with animals. Saw lots of uh, those birds that eat meat, carrion eaters. There was a lot of dead animals around the place that had walked into the minefield. The minefield around Victoria Falls was really damaging to the wildlife. A lot of vultures and other birds would come down to see or look at the meat on the dead animals, pick it off, and they would sit on the wires that were stretched across from branch to branch for the ploughshare mines that were set up. They were little mines that looked like a disc, and the wire came out of it to another tree, and if you sat on the wire, it would fire off, and birds like vultures would come down, sit on them, and in turn get blown to pieces, and so then another vulture would come to pick up the meat of its dead mate plus the original dead animal, and another one would get blown up until a patch was cleared around the dead animal, and then other vultures could land safely. I've just remembered another couple of incidents as well. One involved a lion. Some of my guys were in an ambush near Victoria Falls, and they sensed movement around them. But later on, probably just before dawn, there was a sudden mad rush from the bush, and this huge male lion came out. The guys were alerted by these shuffling noises in the bush, and were getting ready to get up anyway to do their daily walk or patrol or whatever. So they were on guard, and this big male lion just came charging out, just out of nowhere. And one of the alert guys shot it in the chest and killed it instantly. The interesting thing about this, though, is that the response of the national parks, they didn't take this lightly at all. They came along and questioned each guy on the patrol individually to see if they could corroborate the story. They took measurements from where the rifle was fired to the impact point. They took it very seriously. So that's one thing we always had to be cognizant of, if that's the right word, when patrolling in the national parks. We couldn't just go and shoot whatever we wanted to. Another animal that was shot in ambush, a little bit like what I experienced on the riverbank with the calf and the mother. This bull elephant came charging into an ambush, and it was shot in the forehead. The bullet actually was a tracer, which is probably a lighter round than a full metal jacket head. And so it knocked the elephant on its haunches, but it got up, shook its head, and took off to the west. Well, this was reported to national parks, and the body of the elephant was found about 50 to 60 kilometers west of where it had entered the ambush. I think the most frustrating things that we had to deal with in the military were insects, and since they fall in the animal kingdom, I guess they're part of this presentation. The things that used to scare the heck out of me were the scorpions. You used to get these little scorpions, little brown ones, that used to scuttle around your pack at night, and I can remember many occasions of guys sitting bolt upright in the middle of the night, doing all the best they could to suppress a scream, because I never got bitten myself, thank the Lord, but I believe it was very much like putting a red hot needle into your flesh. The bigger ones apparently were less dangerous and less deadly, less painful apparently, but the one night when we were ending a patrol, We were staying in this old farmhouse just southwest of Victoria Falls. It was derelict. The guys were sleeping inside there. They'd put ambush points or strong points at the corner of the house, each corner, and they had guys on guard duty. Well, just before they were about to go to sleep, I decided to sleep outside under a truck with another guy. I threw a rock onto the roof just to see what the reactions would be like, and I'll never forget all these guys. They came flying out the windows, and so I'm glad I did it, because I actually said to them, what the heck do you think you're doing? You know, you should stay in there and defend the house. But the one guy came flying out with a scorpion the size of a motor car on his back. It was huge, big black thing, about 6 inches long, which gave him a hell of a fright. Fortunately, it didn't bite him. Other things that really bugged us were the horseflies. I remember one embarrassing moment where I dropped my pants to do my business, and I heard this buzz, and then this thing latched onto my left testicle, and naturally you can imagine the scream, the bellowing and horror that came out of my lungs as I tried to swat this thing off my left nut, and blood pouring everywhere, because they really gave you a nasty bite. Other things that were not so funny were the ticks. We used to wear boots with socks, and then our combat jeans were ensconced in an elastic band at the bottom where they met the boots. And so the boots and the trousers would touch, but it would leave a small ring of flesh between the jeans and the boots. And every night, or every afternoon before we went into sleeping positions, I would have to scrape a ring of ticks off my leg or legs, and that actually got really serious. I got very bad tick bite fever from them. But I always took a magnifying glass with me to the bush, because you have to find ways to entertain yourselves out there, and I would scrape these things off and burn them with a magnifying glass, which gave me great pleasure. They also tended to get into the folds of the skin in a man's working parts area. I've had a couple in the worst point of the privates, and pulling them off as well makes you bleed like crazy. We used to just put butter or grease on them, and they would pull their heads up very quickly because they breathe through their skeleton. What else did I just jot down here? Bees. When I was out at Jambesi camp, we had a big nest of a big swarm of bees come and nest in right outside the front door to the shed where our ops room was. And they were a risk. Obviously, you could get stung. So I told all the guys to stand back and like a fool. Instead of lighting a fire under there and smoking them out, I got my shotgun out and I emptied both barrels into the nest. Well, you can imagine, I don't know if there were 1,000, 2,000 or 3,000 bees in a swarm, but I probably only killed 30% of them. The other 2/3 took off in the most unbelievable frenzy, and the last thing I saw, there were guys running off to the hills to get away from these bees, diving under vehicles, getting in the cab, doing whatever they could to escape them. So that was a bit of laugh. Also, you get bored in the army because it's 99% weight and 1% action, and even that action might only be 0.5%, unless, of course, you were a regular who was getting shot at every day. But for us guys, quite a lot of funny things happened, stupid things, immature things, but we were kids. So anyway, I got bored one day and I told a guy called Kenny to get up on the water tower with a chicken. And this water tower is quite high, about 10 meters, maybe more. And I said, throw it off there, I'm going to shoot the chicken and we'll have it for supper. And much to my embarrassment, he threw it off. It was only 20 feet away from the end of my barrel, and I missed it. and I got mocked like crazy, so we caught the poor terrified thing, threw it up again to Kenny, and he threw it again, and I missed again. So I got a very bad reputation for not being very accurate with the shotgun. But yeah, another time we had a whole lot of spare detonators, and we decided to go and blow up some frogs in the river nearby, because this was all at a base camp, so it wasn't out in the bush where you were supposed to be sensible. We went down to the river with all these spare detonators, but unfortunately the guy, he was called Gormo, which is the local vernacular for Hill. His surname was Hill. He picked up the battery and the detonators in the same hand, and you just don't do that. And so he had a massive bang go off, and he just held up this bloody mess in front of my face with his jaw dropped. And anyway, his hand turned out to be okay afterwards. I just filled him full of morphine and sent him off in a truck to the base camp, the main base camp, where he was casevaced and go and have some surgery on his hand. So yeah, there was lots of interactions with little animals, little things that crawled. The thing that scared the willies out of me was the foot-long, I'm talking foot-long centipedes that I used my pack as a pillow. It was a lovely pack that fitted my back nicely. When I turned it over, it formed the most beautiful pillow. I was just about to put my head down on my pack one night, and in the semi-light that you get at night in Africa under the stars, I just saw this long ruler, twisty thing run across my pack, just about where I was about to put my head. And I've never been bitten by one, but I believe the sting equals a scorpion, or maybe even worse. And so we had to battle all these little things. Ticks. We had mapani flies. Oh my word. Mapani flies are tiny little bees. And we were in the Kavira forest on the trail of X number of gooks. We'd been put on a cut line as a stop group. We were left there all day. It really annoyed me, without any water, and the place was infested with mapani flies, which, as I said, were little bees, about the size of the flat head of a pin, maybe a little bit bigger than that. They would make the most beautiful honey in the boughs of trees and that type of thing. But because it was so dry, they would go anywhere to find moisture. And obviously your eyeballs have got moisture, your ears have got moisture, your skin, your mouth, and the only way we could combat these little insects was to gather up some animal dung lying around and light it and actually squat over it and let the smoke come up. We did have face masks that we could put on. They weren't very effective. The only way to get rid of them was sitting on smoke. Another thing, being the leader of patrols had its drawbacks. You're probably the first to die in an ambush or a contact or whatever. But the other things, we used to do patrols at night in the Kamatibi forest west of east of Victoria Falls and west of the Jambezi Keep. That was a teak forest, beautiful areas, and the forest was well managed. They didn't just chop everything down. But patrolling there at night, you had these big golden spider webs, very strong. I mean, if you put the equivalent in steel next to it, or a cable, I think that the webs would be stronger. And there were these massive spiders that just sat there in the middle of the nest. And I don't know how many of those I've walked into. You can't see them. You just can't see them. The spider itself blends in with the leaf in the background or whatever. And you walk into this thing, and the next thing you've got a spider running over your face, and with all this wire strapped around you. In the end, I got other guys to lead the patrols in those areas. I couldn't take it any longer. Yeah, so good times, very good times indeed. There's one last thing that's just come to my mind. Around about 1978, one of my guys up in the Vic Falls area, by the name of Eddie, they were in an ambush and they had this horrible odor or smell into their nostrils. And one of the guys that was a bit more clued up said, I think that's a hyena. And so this guy Eddie said, yeah, sure, we don't get hyenas up this way. He'd no sooner said that than a hyena appeared out of nowhere and started to tackle his pack, looking for food, I guess, that was lying nearby. He swung round and hit it in the face with the butt of his rifle, and it went for him and bit him in the face. And I think you can verify this fact, but the bite of a hyena is strong enough to go through a brand new shovel. Its downward bite is incredibly strong, and it bit Eddie in the face, and he had to have quite a lot of plastic surgery after that. The bridge of his nose, around his forehead and his jaw was completely mashed up. Well, that brings me to the end of my 13th talk on Voices of Rhodesian Soldiers. I don't really have anything else to share from my own personal walk through the bush in the years that I served in the Rhodesian Army. You can tell I'm running out of topics when I start talking about ticks and stuff like that, but I found the interaction with the wildlife during the years that I served to be interesting. It was beautiful at Big Falls, where I served a lot. Really beautiful, spectacular sunsets, lots of animals like the sable with their long horns, etc. But anyway, this episode 13 will be my last one. I'll try and get other guys to come on board and give their experiences if I can. Just interesting anecdotes from them, or maybe get a compilation of those. But yeah, I hope to do another video on better known Rhodesian soldiers, male and female, that have been sketched in charcoal. I've done one already, and I hope to do another two of those, so look out for those in the near future. But anyway, thank you for following me this far through to episode 13. I really appreciate your support, and give me thumbs ups if you like what I've done. Thank you very much indeed. Cheers for now.
Rise, oh, rise,